The envelope arrived on a Tuesday in October, and Lenore Cavston understood immediately that her marriage was over. Not over like divorce. Over like transformation. Like the moment before and the moment after would be different women entirely. She set down the contract she'd been hiding behind, the one her husband had signed without reading, and opened the envelope with hands that remained perfectly still. Because the Cavston women didn't shake. They calculated. 6 photographs fell onto her desk. 6 proofs of a life her husband had been building without her. In the first one, he was kissing a woman's hand. In the second, that woman's fingers were tracing his jawline with the concentration of someone memorizing a theft. In the third, they were entering a building Lenore didn't recognize. By the 6th photograph, Lenore understood something that would take her father-in-law 2 weeks and her husband much longer to grasp. She wasn't angry. She was planning. She locked the photographs in her drawer and returned to her contract amendments. The work continued. But the woman doing the work was no longer the same woman who'd sat down that morning. The old Lenore Cavston had believed in reconciliation, in second chances, in the possibility that her husband might eventually see her. That Lenore was dead as of 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. The woman who sat in her office and reviewed contracts with renewed focus was something different. Something that had been building beneath the surface for 5 years, waiting for exactly this moment to emerge. Her assistant had left the photographs with a note. Written in careful script on the back of each image was a name and a warning. Pasha Renault. Strategic consultant. Secondary account. You need to know about the accounts. Lenore opened her bottom drawer, the one Thurston didn't know existed because he had never been the kind of man to pay attention to details, and found what she was looking for. A leather folder labeled Accounts. She'd started keeping records 6 months ago, back when she first noticed the discrepancies. Small transfers that added up to something significant. 7 figures across 8 months. She photographed each page with her phone, then deleted the photographs from her recent items but kept them in a hidden folder, encrypted beneath 3 levels of password protection. She'd learned the fundamentals of hidden infrastructure from her father. She'd perfected them through 5 years of watching her husband not see her. That night, while Thurston slept upstairs, Lenore sat in her home office and read his emails to Pasha Renault. Pages and pages of them. Promises. Lies. Declarations of love phrased in language he'd lifted from novels and films. He told Pasha things he'd never told his wife. That she made him feel alive. That she understood him. That with her, he was becoming the man he was supposed to be. Each email was a small death. Not of her marriage, that had been dying for years, suffocating under the weight of his indifference. Her marriage had died the day he stopped touching her. The day he started checking his phone instead of meeting her eyes. The day she realized she was married to a man who would never truly see her, no matter what she did. This was something else. This was the death of the woman who'd believed he might change. Who'd thought that if she was patient enough, intelligent enough, beautiful enough, he might eventually choose her over the fantasy of someone else. That woman was gone. And what remained was dangerous. She read the emails chronologically, tracking the arc of seduction like a scientist tracking a disease. How Pasha had started as simply the new consultant. How Thurston had described her as innovative and brilliant. How the language had shifted over weeks, becoming more intimate, more desperate. In one email, dated 3 months ago, Thurston had written, "You make me feel like I could be someone important. You make me believe that I'm not just a name my father gave me." Lenore had read that line 4 times. Had felt the full weight of her 5 years of marriage compressed into those 47 words. She'd tried to make him feel important. She'd managed his schedule, coordinated his life, read the contracts he was too lazy to understand. She'd built the infrastructure of his success while he spent his evenings checking his phone, waiting for someone else to make him feel alive. By the time she finished reading all the emails, it was 3:47 a.m. She made coffee. She returned to her home office. She opened her laptop and began to build. Not in anger. In mathematics. She created a spreadsheet. Every transfer documented. Every payment categorized. Every lie catalogued. She traced the path of money as it moved through accounts, following the tributaries of fraud like a hunter following tracks in snow. Secondary credit card.
Check.
Found the statements, dated to a penthouse lease on the Upper West Side. Found the automobile registration. Found the restaurant charges. Found the jewelry receipts. Each discovery was another brick in a wall she was building stone by stone. By dawn, she had constructed something beautiful in its precision. The complete anatomy of her husband's infidelity. Not an emotion. Not a story. A data set. Quantifiable. Verifiable. Undeniable. She closed her laptop and watched the sun rise over Manhattan. Percival Cavston summoned them to dinner at the Hamptons estate 2 weeks later. Lenore drove. Thurston spent the 3-hour drive texting under the pretense of checking work emails, his leg bouncing with the nervous energy of a man living a double life. He looked different to her now. She couldn't quite identify how. His face was the same. His body was the same. But something in the way he held himself suggested that he was no longer present in his own life. He was elsewhere. With her. The estate was exactly as Lenore remembered it from her wedding day. Immaculate. The kind of place that whispered wealth rather than shouted it. 3 generations of Cavstons had lived within these walls. 3 generations of people who understood that power was a language all its own, and most people were too busy trying to be charming to learn to speak it. Percival was waiting in the dining room, 70 years old and looking it, though his mind remained sharp enough to cut glass. He'd built the Cavston Merrifield Corporation from nothing by understanding one fundamental truth. Most people were predictable. They wanted the same things. They made the same mistakes. If you paid attention, you could see those mistakes coming from miles away. The quarterly reports were disappointing, Percival said, not looking up from his plate. Thurston shifted. We're in a market transition, father. The fundamentals are solid. It's just that. The fundamentals are lazy, Percival said mildly, which is worse than incompetent. Incompetence can be corrected. Laziness indicates character failure. The dinner continued in this pattern. Percival asking pointed questions about the company's performance. Thurston offering increasingly desperate explanations. Lenore eating her roast and observing. Her father-in-law had the intelligence to ask about logistics. But he didn't have the numbers. He didn't know about Pasha Renault yet. She decided to give him the information. I've been managing the household finances, she said. Percival's eyes moved to her. I prepare quarterly reports for you. You've reviewed them. I have, Percival said. Your margins are impressive. I read everything, Lenore continued. She paused, letting the implications settle like sediment. Every contract. Every invoice. Every transfer. Something shifted in her father-in-law's expression. Not dramatically, but she saw it. The recognition that his daughter-in-law understood the game. That she'd been watching. That she already knew. Regarding the new consultant on staff, Thurston said, desperately attempting to change the subject, Pasha Renault. I'd like her more involved in the autumn strategy. She has innovative ideas about positioning. Percival's fork paused for a fraction of a second. Tell me about her, he said. And Thurston, 3 glasses of wine into false confidence, made his fatal mistake. He talked about Pasha the way a man talks about a woman he's in love with. Genius. Vision. Revolutionary thinking. The whole time he spoke, Lenore watched her father-in-law's face. Watched him understand, exactly as she did, what was happening. That his son was being systematically destroyed by a woman he barely knew. That he was documenting the destruction himself with every word. After dinner, Percival pulled her into his study. The room smelled like old leather and older money, like the accumulated weight of decades of power. You know, he said. Not a question. A statement. I know everything, Lenore replied. Percival moved to the window and looked out at the Atlantic. Invisible in the darkness, but audible. A constant whisper of something vast and indifferent. I'm having a birthday gala, he said finally. 70 years. The city's most important people will attend. Senators. Billionaires. People who understand how power actually works. He turned back to her. His eyes were pale blue and utterly without mercy. Your husband will make a mistake. He's already making them, accelerating them. Men like him always do. And that woman, she'll reveal herself. She'll show her hand. The whole room will see it. He paused, letting her understand the implications. You have two choices. Take the quiet exit. Divorce him quietly, accept the settlement, build a new life. No one would judge you. These things happen. Or you destroy them both. Lenore understood what he was really saying. He was offering her a test. A choice that would reveal what kind of woman she actually was. The kind who accepted victimhood, or the kind who transformed victimhood into something else entirely. If I choose the second option? Lenore asked. Then I support you, Percival said. Completely. Legally. Financially. Whatever you need, you'll have it. Lenore understood the weight of that offer. It wasn't just money. It was permission. It was validation from someone who understood power better than anyone she'd ever met. What would you do? She asked. Percival smiled. Not with warmth. With the certainty of someone who had built an empire by understanding exactly how to identify his enemies and eliminate them with surgical precision. With the calm of someone who had never doubted his own judgment. I would let them destroy themselves, he said. And then I would take everything. Lenore's smile matched his. The morning of the gala, 2 weeks later, Lenore went to the safe. It was hidden behind Catherine's portrait, Thurston's mother, dead 15 years, present in everything they did. Catherine had been a woman who understood power, who understood that intelligence was currency. Lenore had never known her, but she'd understood her from the beginning through the stories Percival told. The sapphires were gone. Platinum and diamonds and sapphires that had belonged to Catherine, given to Lenore as a symbol of acceptance into the family. Now adorning her replacement. The violation was almost beautiful in its precision, its casualness. The assumption that this transition would go unnoticed, that Lenore would simply accept being replaced with grace. She found Thurston in his dressing room, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror. He looked handsome in the formal wear. He looked like someone she'd once respected. He looked like someone she'd once loved. Where are the earrings? She asked. He didn't look at her. In the safe. They're not. I lent them to Pasha. She needed something blue for her dress. Lenore felt something inside herself crystallize. Not break. Crystallize. The final transformation from wife to strategist. Those belong to your mother, she said quietly. Thurston looked at her then. There was defiance in his eyes. And something else beneath it. Desperation. The understanding that he'd crossed a line and couldn't uncross it. My mother is dead, he said. And Pasha is alive and with me. You need to accept that. Lenore walked out without another word. She went to her bathroom and locked the door. She looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was someone she recognized, but also someone entirely new. Someone her mother would not recognize. Someone her father would have respected. She composed her face back into its normal state. Polite, interested, intelligent, but not threatening. The face that had gotten her through 5 years of marriage to a man who checked his phone instead of meeting her eyes. Then she went downstairs and waited for the car. The Caxton estate had been transformed into something from another century. Not historic. Timeless. White roses imported from specific gardens in France, roses that bloomed only once a year. Orchids arranged with mathematical precision by someone who understood the geometry of beauty. Crystal chandeliers casting light like captured stars. 300 of the city's most powerful people gathered in the grand ballroom, each understanding they were witnessing something significant. Not just a birthday celebration. A moment of reckoning. The dress code was black tie. Lenore wore midnight blue silk. Not a color that screamed for attention. A color that whispered. A color that suggested depth and intelligence and something cold beneath the surface. Her hair was pulled back, exposing the vulnerable curve of her neck. Her earlobes were intentionally bare. Everyone would notice. Everyone would understand the message. Something was missing. When Thurston arrived with Pasha, the room's temperature seemed to drop. The shift was physical, palpable. like a predator entering a room full of prey. Pasha wore red. Not the sophisticated reds of the other women, the muted burgundies and wine tones that suggested restraint and taste. This was violent crimson. Blood red. The dress was strapless, tight enough to be painted on, with a slit that rode dangerously high. She moved through the crowd like she owned it, like she'd already won. And at her ears, the sapphires. Catherine's sapphires. The family legacy. The symbol that had meant belonging. The whispers started immediately. Not loud. These people were too sophisticated for that. But visible. Heads turning. Eyebrows raised. The scandal was being absorbed in real time. Catalogued. Stored away for future conversations at future dinners. Lenore circulated like the hostess she was. She was gracious to the senators. She was charming to the billionaires. She appeared not to see her husband. She appeared not to see Pasha. She was impeccable. And she watched as Thurston and Pasha forgot about her entirely, too consumed with each other and the intoxication of being seen together in public. By 9 o'clock, Thurston was drunk on wine and confidence. He'd had 4, maybe 5 martinis. The alcohol had loosened the final threads of his judgment. He'd spent the evening with Pasha in a corner, whispering things, laughing at private jokes, performing their relationship for anyone who happened to be watching. And many people were watching. That was the thing about transgression in elevated circles. It became entertainment. He climbed onto the stage. The band stopped. The crowd quieted. He grabbed the microphone. The speech was supposed to be about Percival's legacy, about the man who'd built an empire and the lessons he'd taught. Instead, it became about the future, about innovation, about trimming the fat from old structures, about bold new visions, about how the company needed to evolve beyond the constraints of its founders. He looked directly at Pasha as he spoke. He looked at her like she was the answer to every question, like she was the future. "I want to introduce someone special," he said, his voice carried through the speakers, amplified by wine and delusion. "Someone who's shown me what's possible. Someone who believes in the future the way I do. Pasha Renault." He invited her to the stage. The room held its breath. This was no longer rumor. No longer implication. This was declaration. This was a public announcement of his intentions. He was doing this in front of his father. In front of his wife. In front of 300 people who controlled the city's wealth and power. Pasha glided up the stairs like she'd been waiting her entire life for this moment. Which in some way she had. She was being chosen. She was being elevated. She was becoming the story. The woman who'd seduced the heir. The woman who'd won. They presented a portrait that Thurston had commissioned. A painting of the Cavston Merrifield headquarters reimagined. An abstract work. It was gaudy. Completely garish. The kind of thing created by someone having a breakdown. The kind of thing created by someone who had let himself be completely consumed by fantasy. "This is the future," Thurston said into the microphone. "This is what the company could become. Under new leadership. New vision. New energy. A company that's not afraid to question the old ways. A company that embraces disruption." No one moved. The room was perfectly still. The air felt charged, electric with the anticipation of something terrible. Then Percival rose from his seat. He moved slowly, inevitably, like a glacier approaching the sea, like gravity finally enforcing its rules. He moved with the certainty of someone who had built an empire and was about to dismantle a false heir. He said nothing for 10 full seconds. The silence was absolute. He looked at the painting. He looked at Pasha in her red dress and stolen sapphires. He looked at Thurston with his hand on her back. And then he looked into the crowd until he found Lenore. She met his gaze. And she nodded. Fractionally. Just enough. "Thank you, Thurston," Percival said, his voice carried through the speakers like thunder. "You have reminded me of something essential. A legacy is not about preserving the past. It's about selecting who is worthy of the future. And you," he paused, letting the silence stretch, "are not." The room erupted. Not in applause. In shock. in the recognition that something catastrophic was happening in real time. He pulled a piece of paper from his jacket. An actual, physical piece of paper. Legal documentation.
Miss Renault, he said.
Those earrings you're wearing belong to my wife, Catherine Cavston. They were a symbol of family, of acceptance. They are not yours to wear. You will remove them immediately. Pasha's face went white. The color drained from her like someone had opened a valve. And Thurston, you have much to answer for. But before we address that, I'd like to invite the woman who has actually been managing this company, the woman who understands what it means to serve something larger than herself, to the stage. Lenore. Come here. Lenore walked through the crowd. Heads turned. The room parted for her like water. She climbed the stairs with her head elevated, her back straight, her face composed. When she reached the top, Percival pulled her close. It was a visual declaration. She was favored.
She was the heir.
She was the future. I have come to a decision regarding the future of the Cavston Merrifield Corporation, Percival announced. Effective immediately, I am naming Lenore Cavston as acting CEO of the family enterprise. She will manage the trust, the corporate structure, the board of directors, and the inheritance of everything we have built. She will do this better than any man in this room could possibly imagine. The applause was immediate and thunderous. Your inheritance is forfeit, Percival said to Thurston, his voice cutting through the noise. You are no longer welcome in this house or in this company. Security will escort you from the building. 2 security guards appeared at the side of the stage. Large. Professional. Without expression. But the true blow came next. Percival turned to Pasha. Miss Renault, according to the forensic accounting conducted this week, you are responsible for embezzling company funds. $750,000 diverted into accounts under false names. Accounts used to finance your apartment, your vehicle, your lifestyle. The police are waiting in the lobby. The doors at the back of the ballroom opened. Officers in uniform. Detectives in plain clothes. Federal agents. Justice grinding into motion. Pasha tried to run. She moved toward the stairs, and her foot caught the hem of her dress. She stumbled. The crowd parted, nobody trying to help, everyone watching. She reached for Thurston, but he had already stepped back, already begun his own exit into irrelevance. You liar! Pasha screamed. You said we were getting married. You said your father would accept us. You said. But Thurston didn't look at her. He was already gone, in the way that men are when they understand they've chosen wrong and there's no reversal possible. The officers cuffed Pasha with professional efficiency. As they led her away, her red dress became a symbol, not of power, of foolishness, of thinking that ambition and beauty could substitute for actual strategic thinking when playing against someone who had calculated every move. Lenore approached her before they removed her from the ballroom. She looked at Pasha's face. Desperate. Terrified. Already beginning to understand the consequences. I need the earrings, she said simply. With shaking hands, Pasha unfastened the sapphires from her ears. Lenore took them. The clasp was delicate. The metal was cold. She felt the weight of Catherine Cavston in her hands. The weight of legacy. The weight of family. The weight of power. Not for her specifically. For the drama. For the public humiliation of Thurston. For the collapse of the man who was supposed to inherit the empire. She placed them in her clutch and walked back to Percival's side. That night, Lenore stood on her penthouse terrace overlooking Central Park. She fastened the sapphires to her ears. Catherine's sapphires. She'd been waiting to do this. Waiting to wear them as something other than borrowed identity. She looked at the city beneath her. She looked at her own reflection in the darkened glass. She had won completely. Thurston was exiled. Pasha would spend 4 years in federal prison. The company was hers. The legacy was hers. The identity was hers. And she understood, standing there in the cold wind, that she had become exactly like her father-in-law. Calculating. Ruthless. Entirely alone. The sapphires felt heavier than they should have. She thought about the woman she'd been, the woman who'd believed her husband might eventually see her, might eventually choose her. That woman was dead. had been dying for years. She'd just used Pasha Renault as the instrument of the final blow. Lenore touched the sapphires. They were cold against her skin. She thought about Pasha in her cell, beginning to understand what she'd lost. About Thurston in his exile, learning the meaning of ordinary. About the path that had led her here, to this terrace, wearing these stones alone. The price of winning, she understood now, was everything. She had paid it, and she would keep paying it. She went back inside. There were reports to review, strategies to execute, an empire to run. The sapphires caught the light as she moved through her apartment, brilliant and cold, and exactly what she deserved. 6 months later, Lenore Kavston walked into the Kavston Merrifield headquarters as the new CEO. The offices were already transforming under her direction. The heavy mahogany from Percival's era was being replaced with glass and light. The dark leather furniture that Thurston had favored was gone. She was building something new, something that didn't carry the weight of the past. She'd kept some of Thurston's allies on staff for exactly 1 financial quarter. Just long enough to identify which ones had covered for him, which ones had known about the embezzlement and said nothing, which ones had enabled his behavior because it was profitable or convenient or because they'd simply looked away. Those people she terminated, not with malice, with efficiency. She called them into her office one by one and explained that their services were no longer required. The severance was generous. The message was clear. This company would no longer tolerate mediocrity or complicity. In their place, she hired ambitious, intelligent people. Women and men who didn't care about the Kavston name. People who cared about excellence, about execution, about building something that worked. The quarterly report showed profits up 18%, the highest jump in 5 years. Pasha's trial lasted 2 weeks. The prosecutor was merciless. Texts where she'd told Thurston exactly what to authorize. Emails where she'd instructed him on how to hide the transfers. Account statements. Credit card receipts. A complete architecture of deception laid bare for the court. The judge was a woman in her 60s with a face that had never softened for another person's bad decisions. You targeted a family with significant wealth and historical influence, the judge said. You manipulated a man who trusted you. You stole from a corporation. And you did all of it while maintaining a narrative that you were the victim of circumstance. For years in federal prison. $2.4 million in restitution. Pasha's scream when the gavel came down was something that would remain in the memories of everyone in that courtroom for years. But Lenore was in Tokyo, closing a shipping deal that Thurston had abandoned 2 years earlier. When the news of the sentencing came through her phone, she simply closed her laptop and smiled. Not the smile of someone who was happy. The smile of someone who had survived. 2 years after the gala, Kavston Merrifield Industries had the highest profit margins in its history. Lenore had expanded into emerging Southeast Asian markets. She'd doubled the workforce. She'd cut executive overhead by 30%. She'd transformed the company from something coasting on legacy into a machine of unprecedented efficiency. Thurston was working as a property manager in Brooklyn. He'd learned the lesson of being ordinary, learned what it felt like to be invisible. He'd tried once to contact her, 6 months after the gala, claiming he'd changed, that he'd sought therapy, that he understood his mistakes. She'd had her lawyers send a cease and desist letter. She didn't need his apologies. She didn't need his redemption. She needed him gone. Pasha was in the 2nd year of her sentence. The prison had taught her what the world outside couldn't. That ambition without wisdom is a death sentence. That beauty fades. That there are consequences for every choice. She'd written Lenore a letter once, a handwritten note that somehow made it through the prison mail system. Lenore had read it once and burned it. She'd not thought about Pasha since. And Lenore Kavston was at a charity gala in New York, wearing the sapphires and the platinum pin. She was discussing global markets with senators and billionaires. She was charming and poised and utterly unreachable. She was everything a Kavston woman was supposed to be. Someone asked her once, at a private dinner, if she regretted any of it. The revenge. The calculated coldness. The transformation that had taken her from wife to widow to empress. I don't believe in regret, she said. I believe in consequences. I've paid mine. Everyone else is paying theirs. It wasn't entirely true. She did regret things. She regretted the loss of her capacity for love. She regretted becoming someone who could watch her husband's tears and feel nothing. She regretted that the woman she'd become required constant vigilance, constant armor, constant calculus. But she would never tell anyone that, because that kind of honesty was weakness. And Lenore Cavston had learned to recognize weakness in all its forms and eliminate it. She wore the sapphires with pride, even though they were chains. But she wore them nonetheless, because she had paid the price. And she would not diminish that price by pretending she hadn't. The empire would not run itself. And she was the only one left who understood how to make it function. She finished her drink. The night was young. The city was glittering beneath her feet. Somewhere below, people were living their lives, working their jobs, struggling with their relationships, trying to matter. She had won. She had become important. She had claimed power. And the victory was exactly as hollow as she'd expected it to be. She looked at the sapphires in her reflection. Blue fire.
Cold beauty.
The weight of everything she'd sacrificed to possess them. Then she turned away from the mirror and returned to her work. There was always more to build. Always more to optimize. Always more to control. She had learned to love the work instead of the people.
It was a fair trade, she decided.
A necessary one. The empire would not run itself. And she would run it perfectly. Even if perfection meant standing forever at this height, brilliant and alone, wearing sapphires like chains, looking down at a city that would never know her name. Even if it meant that the woman who'd opened the envelope that Tuesday in October was dead, and what remained was something else entirely. Something stronger. Something colder. Something that had finally, completely stopped waiting for anyone to see her, because she'd learned that being seen was just another way to be vulnerable. She closed her laptop. She checked her phone. No messages. No emergencies. The company ran itself now, the way she'd built it to. She poured another drink and looked out at the city. Tomorrow there would be meetings. Decisions. 1,000 small acts of dominion that added up to something she could call her own. But tonight, she stood alone on her terrace, wearing Catherine sapphires, and understood finally what power actually meant. It meant never having to open your heart to anyone again. It meant being the one who destroyed instead of the one destroyed. It meant winning so completely that there was no one left to celebrate with. She finished her drink. She went inside. The city glittered below her, and she owned it all. Every building, every street, every dream that had ever made her vulnerable. And the price, she thought as she returned to her work, had been exactly worth paying.